Gene Simmons of Kiss recently declared that rock and roll is dead. He said basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said that up and coming rock musicians and singer-songwriters essentially don't have a chance and that they shouldn't quit their day jobs. He said that music was always a hard business to succeed in, but that basically now it's almost impossible. Wow, that's a pretty bleak assessment of the music industry from one of the industry's savviest musicians. I've never been a big fan of Kiss or Gene Simmons for that matter, but you have to admit that he has done pretty well on the business side of things. And although I don't respect him as a person or a musician per se, I respect his take on the music business. In this video, I want to dig into the current state of the music business and address the topic of just how the business of music is doing these days. I'm going to look at cold, hard facts and figures and try and draw a reasonable conclusion about the true state of the music business. As I speak currently, it's October 24th, 2014. When people speak of the state of the music business and how poorly it's doing, they're usually referring to declining record sales. It's no secret that record sales have been declining for a number of years now. Anyone who pays attention to the music industry is well aware that the numbers for record sales have been pretty dismal for the last several years. I just recently read an article that as of this month, October 2014, there hasn't been a single platinum album by any artist this year in 2014, not a single one. The only album to go platinum at all this year has been the soundtrack to the movie Frozen. There have been no individual artists to go platinum, and the Frozen soundtrack is the only album at all to go platinum so far in 2014. And just in case you're not aware, a record is considered to have gone platinum when it's sold 1 million copies. I don't have specific statistics in front of me, but back in the heyday of record sales, back in the 80s and 90s, there were usually dozens of albums that went platinum each year. Think of the 80s when stars like Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, Prince, Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, and so on were releasing albums. All of these artists were going platinum, and there were many, many more. Think of Van Halen, the Beastie Boys, Metallica, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, Poison, Kiss, and on and on and on. These are just the artists I'm thinking of off the top of my head that I know went platinum. There were tons of artists selling tons of CDs back in the day. And here we are in 2014, and not a single platinum album by an artist all year. The only artists to come close to this mark so far this year are Beyonce and Lorde, both of which have sold about 750,000 copies of their albums this year, which actually both were released last year. Now, it's still possible that before the end of the year we'll see someone go platinum. Both the Foo Fighters and Taylor Swift are releasing albums, and many analysts are predicting Swift's album to do 1 million in sales, and the Foo Fighters are also predicted to do well. But no matter how you look at it, album sales are way, way down this year. Now, of course, album sales are just one aspect of overall music sales. The record sales numbers I mentioned include both physical and digital downloads. But what about download sales in particular? Here's a quote from a recent New York Times article about download sales. Download sales, a major growth engine for the music industry since the introduction of Apple's iTunes Store in 2003, began to cool several years ago. But their slip from a format on the rise to one on the decline has come suddenly. Last year, downloads of individual tracks fell for the first time by 6%. And in the first half of 2014, they dropped 13% to 593.6 million. We're in a period of transition, David Bakula, a senior analyst at Nielsen, said in an interview. 2 years ago, I don't think anyone would have expected sales numbers to go down this dramatically. So clearly, record sales and music sales in general are not looking good. People just aren't buying as much music as they used to. But of course, this is just one aspect of the music industry. Let's take a look at the concert business. Many artists are touring more than ever to make up for lagging record sales. And the numbers seem to indicate that this strategy makes sense. Last year, 2013, was one of the best years ever for the live concert business. Here's a quote from a recent Billboard article about last year's revenue numbers. The dark days for the industry that marked the close of this millennium's first decade are not only firmly in the rear view, but now appear to be an anomaly. As 2013 box score reports soared to a record level of $4.8 billion in gross ticket sales worldwide. That's up nearly 30% from last year and up 9% over the biggest box score year ever, 2009, the year before the touring bubble burst after a decade of growth. So while record sales are declining, revenue from live music is actually increasing. This makes perfect sense to me because declining record sales to me isn't necessarily a reflection of declining interest in music. It's just that people are listening to music in different ways. Of course, file sharing and illegal downloading is an issue, but more and more people are also simply streaming music or listening to music on sites like YouTube or Vimeo, however that site is pronounced. People still want to hear music and people still want to see artists they like live, but people seem to have become less willing to pay for music. There's no denying that. Of course, you could argue that the quality of music that's being released is contributing to the decline in record sales, and I think that's part of it, but there's simply no denying that music sales across the board are down for all artists. But what about music licensing, which is what my website focuses on? It's pretty hard to quantify just music licensing numbers as they relate to TV and films. But here's a quote from the performing rights organization ASCAP, who I'm a member of, regarding the amount of royalties they distributed last year in 2013, which is, of course, the most recent year we have numbers for since 2014 isn't over yet. These revenue numbers aren't limited to just licensing. They also include royalties for radio airplay, but they're still a good indication of the amount of royalties being paid out to musicians overall. Here's the quote. The American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, ASCAP, the world leader in performing rights and advocacy for music creators, today announced that it distributed over $851.2 million in royalties to its songwriters, composers, and publishers in the calendar year that ended 2013, an increase of nearly $24 million over 2012. Domestic distributions totaled $527.9 million, up 6.1%. 2013 became the sixth year in a row that ASCAP distributed well in excess of $800 million to its members. So, as you can see, ASCAP had an increase in the amount of royalties it paid out to its writers. What about BMI, the other major performing rights organization in the U.S.? Here's a quote from their website regarding royalties paid out last year, 2013. BMI today reported record-setting revenues and royalty distributions for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2013. Revenues increased by $45 million, a 5% gain over the prior fiscal year, exceeding 944 million. So, what do all these numbers mean? Record sales are clearly down. Concert revenue is up. The amount of royalties being paid out to artists is up. How does this all relate to the state of the music business overall? Well, this is how I see it. The music business is clearly not dead. People who make statements like that, in my humble opinion, just aren't looking at the facts. It's certainly true that the recording industry is suffering relative to where it was 10 or 20 years ago, but to extrapolate from that the entire music business is dead just doesn't make sense. Is it harder for record labels to create and release records that go on to become huge blockbusters that sell millions of copies? Well, yes, that certainly seems to be the case currently. Is it harder to become a rock star that sells out stadiums than it used to be? Probably. Not that it was ever easy to begin with. But look, the music business is a dynamic industry like all industries. It's in a constant state of flux. Due to changes in technology, the economy, culture, and probably a few other variables I'm failing to recognize, the music business has changed dramatically in the last few years. There's no denying that. But there is simply too much money being generated in other facets of the music industry beyond just record sales to declare that the music business is anywhere close to being dead. I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't really predict what the music business will look like 10 or 20 years from now. But what I see are lots of musicians still figuring out how to get their music recorded, book shows, license their music, sell CDs, and so on. Change presents opportunity, and the music industry is full of change right now. Some people are getting out of the music business altogether because the change they're seeing is too scary and too painful. And that's okay, because it makes room for new people with new ideas. Here's the bottom line as I see it. Music and musicians are not going away anytime soon, and as long as musicians need to eat, they'll figure out a way to get paid for the music they make.